episode of Rejuvelation. Today is Tuesday, January 30th. I am your host, Daniel Maddox, and welcome to the show. So today, I want to talk about the 7 Hermetic principles and what that means for you and for the world. How it relates to natural law and morality in its very essence. So the first principle that I alluded to last episode was the principle of mentalism. All is mind, mind is all. Principle of correspondence. As above, so below, as within, so without. There's the principle of vibration. Nothing is ever at rest. Everything in the universe is moving at all times. Then there's polarity. Everything is dual. There's the principle of rhythm. Everything goes in wave functions in and out of certain states continuously. Then there's the principle of cause and effect. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Then there's gender. Everything in the universe has 2 states, masculine and feminine, or 2 essences. So, what I have here is from the Kybalion, which is a book written by the 3 initiates, students of the 7 Hermetic principles. So, it goes into mentalism first. The all is mind. The universe is mental. The Kybalion. This principle embodies the truth that all is mind. It explains that the all, which is the substantial reality underlying all the outward manifestations and appearances which we know under the terms of the material universe, the phenomena of life, matter, energy, and in short, all that is apparent to our material senses, is spirit, which in itself is unknowable and undefinable, but which may be considered and thought of as a universal, infinite living mind. It also explains that all the phenomenal world or universe is simply a mental creation of the all, subject to the laws of created things, and that the universe is as a whole and in its parts or units has its existence in the mind of the all, in which mind we live and move and have our being. This principle, by establishing the mental nature of the universe, easily explains all of the varied mental and psychic phenomena that occupy such a large portion of the public attention, and which, without such explanation, are non-understandable and defy scientific treatment. An understanding of this great Hermetic principle of mentalism enables the individual to readily grasp the laws of the mental universe, and to apply the same to his well-being and advancement. The Hermetic student is enabled to apply intelligently the great mental laws instead of using them in a haphazard manner. With the master key in his possession, the student may unlock the many doors of the mental and psychic temple of knowledge and enter the same freely and intelligently. This principle explains the true nature of energy, power, and matter, and why and how these are subordinate to the mastery of mind. One of the old Hermetic masters wrote, long ages ago, He who grasps the nature of the mental nature of the universe is well advanced on the path to mastery, and these words are as true today as at the time they were first written. Without this master key, mastery is impossible, and the student knocks in vain at the many doors of the temple. So, this is a very important key to understand, because knowing that the whole universe and everything we experience and don't experience, all of it is mental, it's mind, it's unlimited. It frees us in a lot of ways, because it shows us that we are a part of that all, and that all is a part of us, which will go into our next understanding, which is the principle of correspondence. So, as above, so below, as below, so above. It basically means that the universe organizes itself self-similarly across all scales. It's all the same. It's organized the same no matter how far you go out and how far you go in. So, it continues. This principle embodies the truth that there is always a correspondence between the laws and the phenomena of the various planes of being and life. The old Hermetic axiom ran in these words: as above, so below, as below, so above. And the grasping of this principle gives one the means of solving many a dark paradox and hidden secret of nature. There are planes beyond our knowing, but when we apply the principle of correspondence to them, we are able to understand much of what would otherwise be unknowable to us. This principle is of universal application and manifestation on the various planes of the material, mental, and spiritual universe. It is an universal law. The ancient Hermeticists considered this principle as one of the most important mental instruments by which man was able to pry aside the obstacles which hid from view the unknown. Its use even tore aside the veil of Isis to the extent that a glimpse of the face of the goddess might be caught. Isis being the goddess of the moon and of femininity in the ancient world, of the feminine, I should say. Just as a knowledge of the principles of geometry enables man to measure distant suns and their movements while seated in his observatory, so a knowledge of the principle of correspondence enables man to reason intelligently from the known to the unknown, studying the monad, which is the smallest thing of the greatest thing. He understands the archangel. So our spirit, our essence, our soul is considered to be a monad. You know, it's the smallest version of the all, or the most compact, the most dense. So, on to the third principle. We have the principle of vibration. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. This principle embodies the truth that everything is in motion, everything vibrates, nothing is at rest. Facts which modern science endorses and which each new scientific discovery tends to verify. And yet, this Hermetic principle was enunciated thousands of years ago by the masters of ancient Egypt. This principle explains that the differences between different manifestations of matter, energy, mind, and even spirit result largely from varying rates of vibration, from the all, which is pure spirit, down to the grossest form of matter. All is in vibration. The higher the vibration, the higher the position in the scale. The vibration of spirit is at such an infinite rate of intensity and rapidity that it is practically at rest, just as a rapidly moving wheel seems to be motionless, and at the other end of the scale there are gross forms of matter whose vibrations are so slow or so low as to seem at rest. Between these poles there are millions upon millions of varying degrees of vibration. From corpuscle and electron, atom and molecule, to worlds and universes, everything is in vibratory motion. This is also true on the planes of energy and force, which are but varying degrees of vibration, and also on the mental planes, whose states depend upon vibrations, and even onto spiritual planes. An understanding of this principle, with the appropriate formulas, enables Hermetic students to control their own mental vibrations, as well as those of others. The masters also apply this principle to the conquering of natural phenomena in various ways. He who understands the principle of vibration has grasped the scepter of power, says one of the old writers. So nothing in the universe is dead. Everything is moving. All things are vibrating. And so nothing is truly dead. Death in that sense does not exist. It's a folktale, okay? Nothing truly ever dies. It just changes vibration, which means it changes form. And certain things are at certain levels of cohesions, such as souls, that they stay more or less within that archetype for quite a long time until they advance beyond that vibration. So just think about that. Then we have the principle of polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. And that's a direct quote from the Kybalion. This principle embodies the truth that everything is dual, everything has two poles, everything has its pair of opposites, all of which are old Hermetic axioms. It explains the old paradoxes that have perplexed so many, which have been stated as follows. Thesis and antithesis are identical in nature, but different in degree. Opposites are the same, differing only in degree. The pairs of opposites may be reconciled, extremes meet. Everything is and isn't at the same time. All truths are but half-truths. Every truth is half false. There are two sides to everything, etc., etc., etc. It explains that in everything there are two poles, or opposite aspects, and that opposites are really only the two extremes of the same thing, with many varying degrees between them. A good example of this is love and fear. People are often of the opinion that they're completely diametrically opposed things that have nothing in common with them. Okay, so my little anecdote to this is when anyone is in fear at any time, what are they in fear of? They're in fear of losing something. They're in fear of being hurt. They have fear for themselves. Okay, and the only way that you could have any fear for yourself is if you loved yourself, because you want to continue on, because you enjoy, because you have a vested interest in this. Okay, so that's the love. So no matter how far you go down to the depths of despair and fear, it is still love at the lowest vibration. So that explains it to me. I mean, that's just, every time I say it, it's like, polarity makes so much sense. And it goes for all things like hot and cold as well, which I'm going to get into. So, to illustrate, heat and cold, although opposites, are really the same thing. The differences consisting merely of degrees of the same thing. Look at your thermometer and see if you can discover where heat terminates and cold begins. There is no such thing as absolute heat or absolute cold. The two terms heat and cold simply indicate varying degrees of the same thing, and that same thing which manifests as heat and cold is merely a form, variety, and rate of vibration. So heat and cold are simply the two poles, of which we call heat, and the phenomena attendant thereupon are manifestations of the principle of polarity. The same principle manifests in the case of light and darkness, which are the same thing, the difference consisting of varying degrees between the two poles of the phenomena. Where does darkness leave off and light begin? What is the difference between large and small, between hard and soft, between black and white, between sharp and dull, between noise and quiet, between high and low, between positive and negative? The principle of polarity explains these paradoxes, and no other principle can supersede it. The same principle operates on the mental plane. Let us take a radical and extreme example, and that of love and hate, which I was just getting into. Two mental states apparently totally different, and yet there are degrees of hate and degrees of love, and the middle point in which we use the terms like or dislike, which shade into each other so gradually that sometimes we are at a loss to know where we like or dislike, or neither, and all are simply degrees of the same thing, as you will see if you will but think a moment. And, more than this, and considered of more importance by the Hermeticists, it is possible to change the vibrations of hate to vibrations of love, in one's own mind and in the minds of others. Many of you who read these lines have had personal experiences of the involuntary rapid transition from love to hate. Just think about how you love someone so deeply one day, and then something happens between you, and the next day it's the reverse. And if it's truly a kinship that's pretty strong, it could take a lot longer than that, and the breakdown of it will take a long time. But if it continues, it'll be even more bitter. And I've had personal experience with that, believe me. In your own case and that of others, that could be the reverse. And you will thereafter realize the possibility of this being accomplished by the use of the will, by means of the Hermetic formulas. Good and evil are but the poles of the same thing, and the Hermeticist understands the art of transmuting evil into good by means of an application of the principle of polarity. In short, the art of polarization becomes the phase of mental alchemy, known and practiced by the ancient and modern Hermetic masters. An understanding of the principle will enable one to change his own polarity, as well as that of others, if he will devote the time and study necessary to master the art. So that whole idea of alchemy that people have been led to believe is the changing of one metal into another, is actually the alchemy of transmuting mental states, consciousness, awareness, from a much lower state to a much higher state. And you can think of that in terms of base metals. If you are running around like an animal, and you think like an animal, you act like an animal only on that state, and your level of awareness is purely in the physical, you only are in the moment, and it's all about you, which that's even lower than an animal state, because animals care for their own a great deal. But if the humans get into certain states where they literally are at a consciousness that's below that of animals. And that's why I'm so proud and happy to be a vegan, because I've seen animals who have so much more care and understanding of what's going on than quite a few people that I've met who are pretty much, psychopaths. They're just unfeeling, uncaring robots. And as I said in the previous episode, I've had experience with this. And people, they get so embroiled in their emotions and their desires that they can't see the forest for the trees, even in what people say, and they they twist the words around to feed some desire that they have. I have a friend who, they heard that I had psychopathic tendencies, and they said, well, I can't be friends with you anymore unless you get a CAT scan, unless you get an EKG or whatever, and show me the receipt that you have that, because I don't trust that you're not still a psychopath. And they're not talking to me now, because they had ulterior motives, because they didn't, they wanted something more from me than I was willing to give, And I told them, listen, I don't have the money to spend on an EKG or a CAT scan. I don't have health insurance. I don't believe in that theft. And even if I could afford it, I wouldn't just do that for you for this, to prove something to you, which is, ultimately ridiculous. But you can see how, even in your own life, you have people who care so much only about themselves that their level of consciousness is so limited and restrictive, and it's only about them, and they only hang out with people that feed into their own ego. And but the important thing here is that all these things can be undone. As it was just saying here, you can apply the principle of polarity and use it to get mental alchemy to change your thoughts and to change other people's thoughts by inspiring in them that energy, that flip in the polarized energy, So this is why all these principles are incredibly important in dealing in life, and overcoming the fear of death, and fear in general, and just understanding how the world works, how it really works. So, going on to the next principle, this is the principle of rhythm. Everything flows, out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. So, that's a direct quote from the Kybalion. Which, by the way, the Kybalion, you can find it on Mark Passio's website. It's there in JPEG format. It's a quick read. It's quite nice. They'll go through all these things. I'm basically quoting it very verbatim here in these slides that I'm showing you. And, it's a really good way. It's the beginning of the journey, basically. When you understand the 7 Hermetic principles, that's really what sets you off on this and on this path of self-discovery and self-awareness and increased awareness and consciousness, because ultimately that's what it's all about. The hero's journey begins and ends in consciousness, because it's all just steps towards the greater, to the higher consciousness of the higher planes. Getting back to the principle of rhythm. This principle embodies the truth that in everything there is manifested a measured motion to and fro, a flow and inflow, a swing backward and forward, a pendulum-like movement, a tide-like ebb and flow, a high tide and a low tide, between the two poles which exist in accordance with the principle of polarity described a moment ago. So this just goes into all these things feed into one another. So if you imagine 6 circles going around each other, overlapping a little bit at each corner, and then another principle in the center of that circle being the 7th principle, and then there's another circle which encompasses all of those, which is the hidden principle, which I'm going to get to in the end here. But they all overlap, and they all feed into another. They're all intricately enmeshed within one another. One depends on the other. So, there is always an action and a reaction, an advance and a retreat, a rising and a sinking. And so this is also very important when you're thinking about the consciousness of mankind, because at the moment, and I'm sure people can relate to this quite well, we are in the lowest, or the retreat, the greatest retreat of human consciousness. Where we are in the universe and where we are as a people, where we are mentally and consciously, is at the lowest state. We have the most information and the most of everything except for consciousness. And 2012 was actually the lowest point. And now we've shifted back upwards, and we're going back up towards consciousness. And so it's been reversed. And so the trend is up. So, it's a good thing. It's a bright future ahead of us is possible, given the energy that's swinging up. However, because that we were for so long in a much more negative downswing, the earth and its inhabitants have gone and built systems of control and systems of insanity, which have really lowered consciousness even more, because it's a self-feeding and self-feeding loop system. And so now, more than ever, people need to wake up to these universal truths, these universal laws of existence, and apply them in their everyday life. And really what this will do is it will lift fear. It'll just shatter it for you. And that is of such great importance, because fear is that lowest state. And that's what causes people to do things that they truly don't want to do. And through the love, through the truth, we can reverse it, and anything is possible. People have no clue as to what humanity could truly accomplish and could truly do for themselves and others if unleashed in its truest, greatest potential. I mean, the possibilities are unfathomable, really. I mean, it's like the mind of God itself. You can't comprehend it because it's unleashed potential. And that's what I'm working for. That's why I'm doing this. Towards that goal. So, there's always an action and reaction, advance and retreat, a rising and a sinking. This is in the affairs of the universe, suns, worlds, men, animals, mind, energy, and matter. This law is manifest in the creation and destruction of worlds, in the rise and fall of nations, in the life of all things, and finally in the mental states of man. And it is with this latter and that the Hermeticists find the understanding of the principle most important. The Hermeticists have grasped this principle, finding its universal application, and have also discovered certain means to overcome its effects in themselves by the use of the appropriate formulas and methods. They apply the mental law of neutralization. They cannot annul the principle or cause it to cease its operation, but they have learned how to escape its effects upon themselves to a certain degree, depending upon the mastery of the principle. They have learned how to use it instead of being used by it. In this and similar methods consists the art of the Hermeticists. The master of Hermetics polarizes himself at the point in which he desires to rest, and then neutralizes the rhythmic swing of the pendulum, which would tend to carry him to another pole. All the individuals who have attained any degree of self-mastery to do this to a certain degree, more or less unconsciously. But the master does this consciously, and by the use of his will, and attains a degree of poise and mental firmness almost impossible of the belief on the part of the masses, who are swung backward and forward like the pendulum. This principle and that of polarity have been closely studied by the Hermeticists, and the methods of counteracting, neutralizing, and using them form an important part of Hermetic mental alchemy. So, if you understand the rhythm, if you understand that it's going to go through the states no matter what, like if you knew, a good example is that the universe is going to go through these different states, and man is going to have states of huge awareness and then states of very low awareness. Even if you're in that time of low awareness, you use the knowledge of these principles to self-center yourself and to neutralize that rhythmic pull that wants you and everything else to go down, because you know the states, you know it, and you polarize yourself towards love, towards the higher self, and then you more or less escape it. I say more or less. You don't ever truly escape any of these laws. You just learn how to mitigate them. So, that's the principle of rhythm. Now we have the principle of cause and effect, which is most well known by almost everybody. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. So, I mean, one of the most interesting parts about the laws of cause and effect are people will say, well, you know, we live in a meaningless universe, and cause and effect is the only thing, and true choice isn't really real. But the laws of cause and effect don't make it that there is no choice. It just makes that whatever choice you make will have an effect. And it's like the Merovingian in the Matrix, where he tries to tell them there is only one true, law that we must all abide, and that's causality. And then Morpheus says, oh, everything begins with choice. And he says, no, wrong. And the reason he does this is because he's talking a lot of truth, the Merovingian. But what the ultimate trick of the devil, or of evil, I should say, or of those who would hide the truth from you, let's put it that way, that's the most egalitarian, I'd say. To those who would use the truth against you, or hide it from you, to have a power differential, must always tell you the majority of the truth, but feed you one great lie. And so, his lie was that there's no such thing as choice, that we're slaves to cause and effect. And that's why he has so much control over those he has control over, because he's convinced them all that it's all cause and effect. That's it. We are in the world that we have no real choice, so we're going to live as slaves. And think about the power that you have over people. If, you're the guy in charge, you're the guy telling people what's up, they believe it, and, you become the authority. And all of a sudden, you're de facto God, basically, because they're taking your word for gospel, and you're the one that knows that there is choice and free will, but you're hiding that. So, on to the principle. This principle embodies the fact that there is a cause for every effect, an effect from every cause. It explains that everything happens according to law, that nothing ever merely happens. So there's no such thing as coincidence, there's no such thing as chance. It all happened because something else happened. Okay, that's just bottom line. That there is no such thing as chance, that while there are various planes of cause and effect, the higher dominating the lower planes, the higher dominating the lower planes, still nothing ever entirely escapes the law. The Hermeticists understand the art and methods of rising above the ordinary plane of cause and effect to a certain degree, and by mentally rising to a higher plane, they become causers instead of effects. The masses of people are carried along, obedient to environment, the wills and desires of others stronger than themselves. Heredity, suggestion, and other outward causes moving them about like pawns on the chessboard of life. But the masters, rising to the plane above, dominate their moods, characters, qualities, and powers, as well as the environment surrounding them, and become movers instead of pawns. They help to play the game of life instead of being played and moved about by other wills and environment. They use the principle instead of being its tools. The masters obey the causation of higher planes, but they help to rule on their own plane. In this statement, there is condensed a wealth of Hermetic knowledge. Let him read who can. Let they read who can. So, yeah, the law of cause and effect, this is a really big one. It is of vital importance, as are they all. To diminish anyone or to make it lesser or greater than the other is really, I mean, the Hermeticists themselves do it. They said that rhythm was the greatest of the principles, because it's truly knowing that all things move between states, and it's going to happen either way. So I guess in my mind what that really means and why it would be the greatest is because if you didn't have the principle of rhythm in hand, you could convince yourself that you could have total control over the states, because you'd have polarity, you'd have, which means that you know that all states are ultimately the same thing or of different degree, and with all the others, you'd have a much more unbalanced version of it. You'd believe that you could control it all completely, and it'd be God complex incarnate with the rest of the principles. And obviously that can't happen because, truly understanding any of this makes you well aware that you're not God, you're a part of it, but you're not it, okay? Although you are. And that's the polarization again, that all things are dual, all truths are half-truths, and, but they can all be reconciled. Even though it's a half-truth, this is a great example of a half-truth that still it's a paradox that reconciles itself perfectly. You are God because you're a part of it, but you aren't it, and yet you are. I mean, and if you really think about it, it's perfect. It's such a perfect thing. I love it. I love it. All these things give me so much more power over my situation, over my fear, over which becomes less and less as the more I dive into this stuff. Which is another reason why I'm putting it basically as my... this is like the first podcast that's really diving into one aspect instead of that whole tidal wave of information that I gave in the first one. Because this is one of the most important things that you could even ever realize. Okay, so on to the principle of gender. Gender isn't everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. So not just in the physical, not just in the mental, it's beyond this. It's in it, within it, all of it, and beyond, okay? So people get all twisted up inside because for a number of reasons, one of which is because there's a war on the sexes, between the sexes, that's being engineered by the social engineers, who basically want division, division, division. And as I said in the first episode, with the Dark Masons wanting to build with a pyramid of brick to cover up the all-seeing eye of knowledge and truth so that they can rule on high through the divisions. Because the more they divide, the more they control the divisions and the way people are divided and the way they associate between one another, and they have all the truth, then they have such a huge, enormous one-up on everybody that it's the true one world order of new world order of darkness. Because there's no more light shining from the all-seeing eye of truth and love and true care. And so that's why when I go into the principles of gender, many people are going to be triggered immediately because they're being raised. I had a conversation with somebody the other day that I met for the first time, and I was telling them about the principles, the 7 Hermetic principles. Everything was all gravy until I got to the 7th principle of gender. Like, whoa, stop. What? No, don't talk about it. And I think I mentioned this before as well. She says, gender is a tool used by society to destroy us all. And I was, trying to explain to her, yes, there is a war. And no, she's like, no, it's all just, male privilege and whites and stuff like this. And I was like, I was about to get into it further with her, but then somebody interjected somebody came in from the bar and talked to one of my other friends and totally changed the subject. We started talking about sports and everybody became insanely uncomfortable, but it had already been changed and I'd already said my piece more or less, although I could have gone on, believe me. And I probably should have, but you got to speak the truth. You got to speak it. You got to plant the seed. Because speak freely while you still can. And that's another reason why I do this, because I still can and I have to. So, on to the principle of gender. This principle embodies the truth that there is gender manifested in everything, the masculine and feminine principles ever at work. This is true not only of the physical plane, but of the mental and even the spiritual planes. On the physical plane, the principle manifests as sex. On the higher planes, it takes higher forms, but the principle is ever the same. No creation, physical, mental, or spiritual, is possible without this principle. An understanding of its laws will throw light on many a subject that has perplexed the minds of men. The principle of gender works ever in the direction of generation, regeneration, and creation. Everything and every person contains the 2 elements or principles of this great principle. Within it, him or her, every male thing has the female element also. Every female contains also the male principle. If you would understand the philosophy of mental and spiritual creation, generation, and regeneration, you must understand and study this Hermetic principle. It contains the solution of many mysteries of life. We caution you that this principle has no reference to the many base, pernicious, and degrading lustful theories, teachings, and practices which are taught under fanciful titles and which are a prostitution of the great natural principle of gender. Such base revivals of the ancient infamous forms of phallicism tend to ruin mind, body, and soul, and the Hermetic philosophy has ever sounded the warning note against these degrading teachings, which tend toward lust, licentiousness, and perversion of natural principles. If you seek such teachings, you must go elsewhere for them. Hermeticism contains nothing for you along these lines. To the pure, all things are pure. To the base, all things are base. So there you have it, people. It's not what it's commonly referred to, and it's not what it's being used as a weapon for, and it's really pretty important that people differentiate between that and the lustful, carnal version of it. So, Let's see here. I have some more pictures that I'm going to go into. Okay, natural law. So, the eighth and final principle, which I alluded to in the beginning, it's called the lost principle, is the dynamic of care. So, as I was trying to explain, all of the 7 principles in the circles that overlap, and then the center overlapping all of them being gender, and then one that encompasses all of it. And I'll actually put that up for you so you can see it. This is care. What we care about on a day-to-day basis acts as the driving force of our thoughts and actions. Therefore, care can be seen as the ultimate generator of the quality of our experience. This principle has been often referred to as the generative principle. The word generative is derived from the Latin verb generare, which means to create. So everything worth having in this universe stems from care. And the positive form of care, because there's also dark care. And this is also a form of contention with many people in the movement and people who study this knowledge. The dark occultists who rule this world, who control the banking, who control the main families, basically they're the true puppet masters behind it all. They get what they want from the universe, because you have to have care to get what you want from the universe. Okay, your thoughts and actions plus your care have to align. Your trinity has to exist: thoughts, emotions, and actions, to get what you want. And they have a form of care. They really truly care about what they're doing. Not in the sense that you think. They don't like, oh, what we're doing is so great, and we're doing this for the benefit of everybody. No, that's not the care that they have. The care that they have is, our work must be done. It is what we're all about. It's the only form of care that we really have, because in essence, they're psychopaths. They're fundamentally broken inside. And because of this, the positive care, the true care for oneself and others, doesn't exist. They only have the type of care which is, feeding into their physicality, into the physical 5 sense world, getting more for themselves, more power over others. That type of thing. They care about that because that's all they know. And the care that you and I may have for ourselves and others is missing. It is not there. The mechanism within them that allows that, gone. Not from birth, or even it has been bred into them, because they allow themselves to be in that mentality for so long that they just become calcified in that consciousness. And that's what I was trying to explain to my friend. I had that consciousness of not caring, of being a robot, but I broke out of it. I fell in love. I did a bunch of shamanistic experiences. I had a lot of psychedelic trips, which really broke me down step by step, often brutally. And that's the whole thing about doing it in the correct setting. I can't stress that more for people. If you're going to do psychedelic plants, you're going to have to do it in the right set and setting, and with the proper intention. Because that's truly what's going to set you free. That's truly what's going to break down the walls. What's really going to reconnect you with what's important and what's true. So, basically, I want to also talk about the last things that I really want to hit on are principles and morality, how these things, right and wrong, how these things manifest themselves. So, I'm going to do a quote here, and this is really going to explain right and wrong. there is only one sin, only one, and that is theft. Every other sin is a variation of theft. When you kill a man, you steal a life. When you steal his wife's right to a husband, rob his children of a father. When you tell a lie, you steal someone's right to the truth. When you cheat, you steal the right to fairness. There's no such thing as any wrong that isn't truly theft. Because if you're doing a wrong, there has to be someone on the other end, you know? Or something, some force or some entity on the other end which you're doing that wrong to. Okay? And that wrong basically only manifests as you're stealing it from them. Because if you're not truly taking anything away, not physically, mentally, emotionally, anything from that other being, then you're not actually hurting them. You're not stealing from them. But in any way in which you are, you're stealing it from them. And this feeds into what I'm talking about, and this is by Kobe-Gusini, that quote that I just read there. So, right and wrong basically go like this. When it's a right, it's correct, based in truth. It's moral, in harmony with natural law, and their actions that are based in it. They do not result in harm to other beings, sentient beings. Now, when you commit a wrong, or when something's wrong, it's incorrect. It is not based in truth. It's immoral, in opposition to natural law, and they are actions based in it. Actions based in it result in harm to other sentient beings. So this is very important. And basically, taxation is, and I'm going to just keep harping on this because it's really huge. It's one of the hugest things that we depend on, and depends on us to perpetuate a world that none of us truly want. The prime example is being, they take the taxes without your consent, and then they use it in whatever way they want, usually through war, and usually through programs which really do not help people become self-efficient, self-realized, conscious beings. And it perpetuates the use of money, which it doesn't exist, okay? Money has never and will never exist in nature or anywhere else. It is only, it's a figment of the imagination, as is government, okay? And both of those things are wrong and immoral, because both of those things force upon others theft, mandatory theft, whether it's through your money, whether it's through your compliance, what have you. It steals from you, from the beginning, from inception, ab initio, which means from inception in Latin, okay? From inception. Now, natural law expresses itself in many ways, and I'm going to talk about the positive expressions and the negative expressions. And by the way, this is all natural law. All what I talked about, the 7 principles, the 7 Hermetic principles, morality, right and wrong, these are all natural law. So, positive expression of natural law, love. Negative, fear. A positive expression, the initiative expression is knowledge, seeking truth. The internal expression is sovereignty, internal monarchy. You are your own ruler. You rule yourself. And the external expression is freedom, external anarchy, which means on the outside nobody's ruling you, but on the inside you rule yourself. And the generative expression or manifestation of love, of the positive expression of natural law, is order and good, or good. Now on the negative side, fear, the initiative expression is ignorance, refusal of truth. The internal expression is confusion, internal anarchy. So that means within yourself you have no control. And the external expression of fear is control, external monarchy. Outside of you, you have rulers, you have authorities to which you must obey, supposedly, but not even. It doesn't exist, folks. Authority is a myth. And then for the negative expression, or fear, the generative expression or manifestation of it in general is chaos or evil. So I want you to really look at this graph and really get it, okay? Because these terms, monarchy and anarchy, are really, they're important to understand. Because monarchy means the one ruler, and anarchy means no rulers. So if you have internal monarchy, it means that you're the one ruler of yourself. But if you have external monarchy, there's one ruler who rules you, and it usually isn't pretty. This is why they changed over long ago, at some point, from monarchy to democracy or to city-states and to all this, because they realized that people were really waking up to the, how much control they were really under and how wrong it really was, and they were losing control. People were getting more and more freedom, and they no longer had the ability to truly control people, so they said, okay, let's just flip the switch, let's change it over, perceivingly, from a monarchy to, oh yeah, no, you have a choice. And it's dialectic. It's dialectical technology, which basically means you think you have a choice, you choose the right or the left. You don't actually have any other option besides that, because they make those two ones solidified as the only real choices. And there are slight differences between the two, but the ultimate agenda is controlled by the same forces behind the curtain. Okay, so it's basically whenever you think of politics, always think of a bird with two arms outstretched. Okay, if you choose the right, you're still choosing the bird. If you choose the left, I did that opposite. This is right and left. But whichever arms of the bird, wings of the bird you choose, ultimately it's being controlled by the same forces in the center, who get what they want done, even if they have to flap their wings a certain way to woo you or woo everybody to make you think that it's one way when it really isn't. So another very important thing to look at. Okay, so now ultimately what this is all about is seeing beyond the veil, seeing outside of the matrix, seeing how the wheelworks of nature truly affect us all. And this slide here, it's called the Flammarion woodcut from 1888, okay? And what it represents, what we're seeing here, is a man who is in the physical world, in the physical domain, and it's normal. As you see, there's the sky is filled with stars, and there's the moon and the sun and trees and rivers and mountains and plants and villages and civilization. And he's a shepherd. He has a staff there where he's stepping outside of the veil. He's stepping through the skylights, through the globe, if you will. There's like a globe, and he's within it. And he's looking out into the universe, and he's seeing wheels within wheels, which was described in the Bible, which is another representation of the wheelwork of nature and how things truly work. The underpinning substrate of the universe. Also, some say it was alien technology, and he was Enki, or not Enki. It's one of the lost books of the Bible. Basically, this guy was taken up into the heavens and shown how it all works and stuff, and that was described. But it's also an analogy and an allegory to the workings of nature. And so he sees how everything's working and how it's all the truth behind the matrix. And that's what we're really getting towards here. This is what we're really focusing on. Through my efforts and through efforts of others, such as Mark Passio, such as Bob Tuscan, such as Larkin Rose, such as a bunch of other people who really get down and dirty and really dig down and show you the true causal factors of why we're here. You'll see outside the matrix, you'll see how it's all working, how it's all been played and messed with, and it basically, the ultimate goal not only is for you to basically realize that you're in the matrix, but to get out of it and to help others get out of it. And that's why I'm here, and hopefully that's why you're here too. So, another thing that I want to touch on is principles. It comes from the Latin noun principia, which means first, foremost, leading, chief, most necessary. Okay, that which is most important. So if you ask anybody on the street, what are the most important things in your life? Most people would say family, or their work, or their lovers, or whatever, but very few people would say principles. And this is pretty sad, especially since principles means the most necessary, most important first things. And believe me, if you're going to have any family worthy of a name, you're going to have true principles that come first. Because ultimately, principles are the underpinnings of all good things. Without principles, which in essence are morals, are your integrity. Without those things, what is your family really going to end up being after a few generations without principles? Without morals. It's just going to be the same families that we see of the dark occultists, basically, who raised children as tools to perpetuate their agenda and could care less about them, even if they could. And they perpetuate these things over and over and over because they truly don't have principles that are worthy of that name as well. They have things that they consider of the utmost importance, so I guess, they truly do, but it's dark principles. And again, this is all leading back to polarity and seeing which end of the scales you're at, and also that all paradoxes can be reconciled, because how could you have care on both ends of love and hate, and how could there be principles on both? Because it just means the most necessary things to you, but there are much more necessary things to life and to creation. But destruction also is a necessity, and it has things that it must have. So, which is what Lucifer is said to be, the ultimate negation to God, the part of God that it can't destroy or it can't overcome, because it's a polaric difference that must exist within it. It's a function of itself that it can't get rid of. I've heard people talk about this before. Oh, God could erase the devil in a minute, but he's testing us. No, it's just an aspect of the all which must exist. For the laws of existence to be in effect, it has to exist. It's a necessary force. Just as love is a necessary force, fear is a necessary force. The degree to which either one lives and dies, that is a momentary blip in the grand scheme of things. But it's also something that's very important to realize. So, let's see. What I also want to talk about is, well, karma, for instance. This is really another thing that's pretty important. Karma, basically, you don't have to do anything, because everything is up to you. Everything begins with choice. You may have done things in your life that you feel bad about, okay? But it's not required for you to fix them. It's just that if you don't address them, it is a continuous cause that has effects, okay? So, most people, if they truly felt the repercussions of the things they did immediately, once done, they would cease to do them. They would realize what's going on, they would catch on to it quick, and they would stop it. And I have a picture here of a kid who is giving the bunny ears or the devil ears, however you want to look at it, to another kid behind him or next to him, and he doesn't realize that the donkey behind him, his ears are right behind him. And it's a funny little scene here, and it's not, I was trying to find things where it was more, negative, like somebody hits somebody and then they get hit immediately. But I think this really hits home quite well. It's showing that whatever you're doing, which may be negative or positive, whatever, you're getting it right back. And it's instant. It's happening simultaneously. Karma doesn't work that way. It's a law. Karma is a law of cause and effect, but it has different connotations too. I've heard people describe it as karma is the choices that you make given what the situation is and what you created. It's the law that is in effect, but it doesn't have to be adhered to. It's just that your level of suffering will depend greatly on it. And Andreas Moritz, or Mortis, who is a guy who wrote a couple books on health and healing, he was saying, and there's a picture of him right here, if you want to look him up on YouTube, he was saying that in his previous lives, he was chopping off heads in the Sahara left and right, and he loved killing. And in this life, he's discovered his dark past, he discovered his dark urges or whatever. He had an awakening, or he had a choice at one point where he decided, okay, now I'm going to be the opposite of a murder-killing machine. I'm going to, a murderous killing machine, I'm going to be a healer. And so, but he said that when he made the choice, he didn't think he ever would have made that unless he had gone so far in the opposite direction in the previous life, in a previous incarnation. So that brings to mind, a very important thing, not to look at karma as a bad thing so much, and that's not to say that starving kids in Africa deserve what they have, and this and that, because I don't believe that they brought that upon themselves. I believe that's manufactured, which is another tie-in to the secret, or to the law of attraction that people believe, where you could just think something and you'd have it, okay, and it would get there. And I don't believe that. I believe that you have to think it, you have to intend it, and then you have to act upon it. You have your thoughts, emotion, and actions. Your Trinity must be in full effect for you to truly get what you want. Now, I believe that there is definite power within thought that can affect the physical world, but not to the degree that they're talking about. It has to be a quantum effect. Once everybody starts thinking it, then literally all their actions, thoughts, emotions, and actions are in line anyways, and then it becomes a manifested reality. But everybody has to think it at the same time, the majority at least. So, I believe I've touched on everything, and thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Rejuvelation.